Welcome to the Deal to Heal with E. James podcast. I am your host, Earnest James, aka Friend to Fatherless Daughters on Instagram. And I believe that everyone can live a life that is whole, healthy, and happy. And so my mission is to help people to deal, heal, and fulfill. Deal with your problem, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. So again, I thank you for joining us. We are on episode number five, and we have a special guest with us today, Mr. Leonard Webb. I'll let him introduce himself. How you doing, Mr. Webb?
I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I'm
Thank you. Now, I thank you for being on. I'm good on making sure I say thank you because you didn't have to be here, but you did, and I appreciate it. So, just for us to get started, won't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do?
Thank you. I spent 27 years in law enforcement. I counseled men that were incarcerated in all various types, from guys with life sentences to guys with short-term sentences. I started a program for young offenders that were between 18 and 30 that were serving long sentences, which we considered over 5 years, and helping them transition through the process of prison so they wouldn't get into trouble and they can get released the day they were supposed to get released. And then I transitioned to a substance abuse counselor, where I was helping guys who had substance abuse issues as well as other issues transition back. When they got within 2 years of release, they were able to join my program, and they would, if they completed the program, they would get a year off their sentence. So during that time, I was also working as a faculty member in a college. And what led me to what I do now was I kept seeing guys, young men, especially young men of color, coming into the institution without GEDs. But the thing that really stood out to me was they had a lot of undiagnosed learning disabilities, undiagnosed mental illnesses. Well, I saw those same group of young guys come into my college classroom. And I was wondering, how did these guys get in here and not end up in prison? Because a lot of them were from the same area. And what I found was the guys that were coming into my college classroom had got services. They were diagnosed early. They had found some learning disabilities and mental illnesses that were addressed during their school time. I also found that the disciplinary processes and the guys that were coming into the prison while they were in school were disproportionate to what I had seen as far as schools go. And I received a phone call, it's my 27th year in the prison system. I received a phone call from a mom, and it's not unusual for me. And she thanked me. But what was unusual is how she ended the call. And she said, "Mr. Webb, I believe you would do more good keeping youth out of prison rather than helping grown men stay out of prison." And she had a son that was incarcerated, and that's what she was thanking me for helping him, because she thought she was going to die with him in prison because he was just in and out his whole life. And the last 5 years, he hadn't went back, and she had some hope, and she wanted to thank me. And I said, "Thank yourself, because you're providing the support he needs while he's out. Apparently, it's nothing I've done." But when she dropped that line on me, I started researching more, and I came across a quote from Bishop Desmond Tutu, and it said, "It comes a time where we got to stop pulling people out of the river and find out why they're falling in." And I said a week later, I'm leaving the prison system. I'm going to start my own educational consulting, helping students with academic success and helping especially educators connect with those students so they can have equitable schooling throughout their years, and disciplinary processes can be fair and equitable. And I just, week later, I said to my boss, "I'm leaving." And that was kind of my start to doing what I do now, and coaching educators and going around speaking to students across the country about academic success and, the disciplinary process and what has been termed the school to prison pipeline.
Cool. Yeah, and I like that the mother drop that knowledge on you, because it's amazing how, God had used people to speak into us. Because even with me, with the podcast this year, I've been a guest on about maybe 5 or 6 podcasts, and talking about fatherless daughters. And after one such podcast, me and the host was talking, and he was like, "You need to have your own podcast." And he spoke some things to me, and I said, "You know what? I'm gonna get out there and do it." And so here I am. And the same thing with you. When that mom spoke those words to you, it's like, you know what? God allows people to speak to us at the right time to say the right thing for us to get on the track that He will have us to be on. And so I know that you kind of gave a definition of it, and you just used the term, but I wanted to, if you could, go a little bit more of what exactly is the school to prison pipeline.
It's policies and procedures that push young people, especially young people of color, out of the school system and then into alternative schools, suspending, expulsion, which leads them to miss time in classrooms and makes it more likely for them to be touched by the criminal justice system. And what happens is, the more a child is expelled or suspended or put in an alternative school, the more likely they will end up in the criminal justice system. By the 9th grade, if a student has been suspended at least once, they're 6 times more likely to be arrested later in life. And it's almost double that if they're a child of color. So when I started looking into this, there are certain policies. The most popular one is the zero tolerance policy. And that came about when school shootings came out in the 1990s. And it was for gun violence. But what happened was they started using it in the classrooms, where if you were disrespectful, and we know disrespect is kind of an arbitrary thing.
Right.
It's how I perceive it for disrespect.
Right.
And what was happening is children of color were more likely to be suspended for being disrespectful, almost 5 times as likely. But the zero tolerance was originally for guns and gun violence and drugs. But what happened is they started using it for disrespect, classroom behaviors. And then the next thing was school resource officers. And I always say this, there are a lot of school resource officers that do a great job and have good connections and are good role models. But what happens is those same type of biases that we talk about with the disciplinary process as far as disrespect, it goes with school resource officers as well. And they're not trained in childhood brain development. They're not trained in any pedagogy or anything like that that has to do with the school system. They're trained in law enforcement. They're trained in enforcing the law. And when those two paths cross, we've seen it on video. We've seen kids getting tossed on the ground. We've seen kids getting assaulted by police officers. We've seen a first grader get handcuffed in the middle of a classroom because law enforcement isn't trained in that. No disrespect. I was in law enforcement for 27 years. We're just not trained in those things. So the part about de-escalating and all that, it doesn't work for the most part. And the schools where it's working well with the school resource officers, they don't need them. They don't need them anyway.
Right.
They're kind of just there. The schools that do have trouble with certain behaviors and violence and weapons and stuff, they're not receiving services like mental health services. They're not receiving social services where they can excel at school, where school is a safe place for them. So the focus, there are schools without counselors, there are schools without nurses, but they have school resource officers. And that doesn't make any sense. We need those services in the school because schools with school resource officers are more likely to disproportionately punish Black and brown students, and they're more likely to end up in the criminal justice system.
Right. So I heard you speaking about the officers. So to me, we often hear when it says respect starts at home, or this or that starts at home. But a child spends so much time at home, but then he spends probably just about as much time or even more time at school. So when we think about those two dynamics, we got the parents and then we have the teachers. What part do you think the parents play in trying to prevent this, the pipeline? And also, what part do you think the teachers play, and how can they kind of work together to, prevent our students from being, part of this system?
Yeah, that's excellent. And that's my approach, is to get those three parts as a team to get the child to excel. The teachers have to be able to, they can't rely on the resource officers for classroom management. Mm-hmm. And for me, it starts with the principal. The principal has to know an educational philosophy that he brings to the school. And then the teachers need to know what that educational philosophy is. Once you have that, the teachers can support the parents. If the principals at the top support the teachers and the teachers support the parents, inherently the children get supported. And not taking away, we have certain societal dynamics that play a part in the parents' role, and not taking away any of their responsibility. But the important part for parents is ABC: attendance, get them to school; behavior, focus on their behavior, especially focus on the things that you may see that may cause trouble. And then their coursework. Find what their gift is, what they're good at it, and help them accentuate that gift, and find out what their limitations is, so that you can help them, whether it's with tutoring or mentoring or whatever that is. So I focus on the attendance, behavior, coursework. And when you do that, you're more likely to get that child through school and into college and trade school.
I like that. ABC, attendance,
behavior, and coursework.
Okay, attendance, behavior, and coursework. And I'm glad that you mentioned the trade schools, because that definitely is a avenue that is not accentuated as much. I'm a bricklayer, a union bricklayer by trade, and I grew up and I went to school. I already knew what I wanted to do when I was in 8th grade, but I didn't find out about the bricklayer, or should I say, I didn't get into the union as far as the bricklayer. So I was 25, So imagine had I had that option and even learned about it, was told about that option right out of high school. What a difference it could have made in my life. I'm okay now, but that head start could have really helped me out. So I'm glad that you give that information, to the young men that you come across, and definitely, especially young men that may have already been in the system, because a lot of times we get repeat offenders because they get into the system, and then when they come out, they feel like they don't have nowhere else to turn. But the building trades is something that they can go into, because most building trades will look past whatever your felony is or whatever, as long as you can do the work. As long as you're willing to do your work and get the training, then, they can always have a job in the trade. So I'm glad that you give that information and, have that outlet. One of the things I wanted to mention, because we mentioned students and their behaviors. And most of the times, like you said, the student is kind of forced or pushed into the pipeline because of, disciplinary actions of the school. So if you could change something, or what is one thing that you see that happens that kind of get that ball rolling, and if you could change that, what would that be?
I can give you an example. There was one school system that I was working with, and they had a high number of suspensions compared to the rest of the state. So I wanted to look at their disciplinary data. And when we looked at it, it wasn't because of violence and fighting and all this stuff. It was for those perception-related events disrespect or behaviors that could have been handled by the teacher, and the teacher was putting them off to the school resource officers. My idea is teachers need to handle their classroom behaviors without the school resource officer, because if a kid throws a pencil at another kid, and as bad as that may be, in a law enforcement's perception, that's going to be assault.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to go on their record and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
While, and this, I'm done talking about, a ninth grader. I'm talking about a third grader that threw a pencil.
Mm.
And already getting put into the system where that's something that can be handled by a social worker, a guidance counselor. That can be, those issues like that can be handled. So I impress upon them to handle the issues that you can in-house. Guns or whatever, drugs, I understand. Even that, though, can be, you have to get to the why things are happening. And I'll give you an example. A young girl brings a knife to school. Zero tolerance says, she has to go. But this principal did the smart thing. He just had a simple question for her. Why? Why did you bring the knife to school? And she told him, I have to walk to school. The people, as I walk to school, they keep beating me up and taking my lunch money. And I need to defend myself. This principal said, okay, where's the bus stop? Where do you live? And he got with the bus, the people in charge of the bus, and he said, she will be here on your route so you can pick her up and get her to school. So she doesn't have to go past any of that nonsense. That's what I'm talking about. Those are the type of things where if we think outside the box, rather than this kid's from wherever, and a lot of kids get labeled by the time they're in kindergarten because they had an older brother and sister, or because the neighborhood they came from. And that's another thing I wish we'd get rid of, those labels. I mean, there's so many things that I've come across that if we address, we can change the way schools operate. And schools have to change. And we saw it during the pandemic. Schools have to change. It's no longer suitable for the students to sit in a classroom and regurgitate the information. That's not 21st century learning. 21st century learning is critical thinking, collaboration. We have young entrepreneurs. I try and push, you were talking about the bricklayer, I try and push, okay, be a union person. Get the insurance, get all the benefits.
Right.
Spend some time for yourself. Spend some time trying to build, learning what you see this union person doing, and you do that and have your own company and hire your own people. So it's that, and I grew up in it. Get a good government job, get the benefits, take 2 weeks of vacation every year, retire at 67, and die at 78.
Unfortunately, that's how it works too.
The mindset. We got to get out of that mindset. We got to get out of the mindset. I was in my 50s when I got out of that mindset. When that, beautiful woman, called me on the phone and said, you know what, you need to do something different. And the funny part is that I've got those messages for 27 years and I never listened. And I think about the story where there's a guy drowning in the ocean. He says, God, I'm going to pray for you to help me. And a boat comes by and he says, nah, wait, I'm praying. I'm waiting for God to send me help. And another boat comes by and he says, well, I'm waiting for God to send me help. He eventually drowns. When he gets up to heaven and meets God, he says, God, I was waiting for your messages. And he said, I sent you 2 boats.
Right.
Yeah. And for me, that phone call was actually a conversation through God, through that woman to me. And I finally didn't say, let the boat pass. I finally got on the boat and saved myself and put me in position to save others.
Right. And I'm so glad that you did, because I know that your work is going to help a lot of people. And already helping people. Just by what I see, watching your lives and things that you have on Instagram, and even the information that you put out, I can resonate with it. So I know that those students and those teachers that are being influenced with you on a day-to-day basis definitely is getting the knowledge that they need to be able to help these students. So another question that I have, because we know that the pipeline starts at the schools. And what you said earlier was that you would see these students come into your college, and then you also see these other students coming into the justice system at the same time. So we know that education definitely has to play a part in that, making the difference between one way or another. So how important is a good education, to that student, and what can we do as people or just as parents to make sure that that student gets that education so that they don't go, down the road or going to the prison, but instead they go to the college?
It's important for education wise, in that 80%, over 80% of the guys I dealt with coming into the prison system didn't have a high school diploma, over 80%. And the question wasn't their intellect, because most of them passed the GED their first time they took it without any, other testing. I knew they were smart enough to take that test and pass it. So it wasn't a question of aptitude. It was a question of wanting to be there. And one of the first things I teach is teachers have to connect with students that don't look like them. And I'm not talking about race or anything, that just we don't have the same background. So they have to focus on, how can I support this child while I have them, even though they don't look like me, they're not where I'm from, they have cultures and practices that I'm not familiar with. How can I connect with them? That's one of the important parts. As parents, we need to focus on biggest thing, getting them to school and making sure the education is a priority. And that's through our conversations. That's through, my father had a 6th grade education, but he read the newspaper every day, every single day. That led me to believe reading is something important. It's just making sure we model those type of things. Like I said, my father had a 6th grade education, but he would read the newspaper. Maybe he wasn't reading the newspaper. I don't know. I don't even know if he may have not been able to read much, but that behavior helped me into starting to read, starting to recognize that reading is important. It's just little things that parent-teacher conference. Make sure, I tell parents all the time, that secretary, the principal, your teacher should know who you are. There's no excuse nowadays. You have FaceTime, you have all types of things that you can do to connect with that parent or teacher. They should know who you are. And for teachers, on the same thing, is that your first call shouldn't be your kid's in trouble. Johnny did this in school. Your first call should be, sometime the first week of school, I'm happy to have Johnny in my classroom. Let's work together and see what we can do. What's his strengths? What's his limitations? That's where it starts. And when I say a collaborative effort, that's what I mean, is that the teacher has to have a relationship with the parent. The principal has to have a relationship with the teacher, and then the student prospers.
I think that definitely would break the ice and put a bridge between the teacher and the parent if they had that conversation, with the teacher reaching out and saying, I glad to have your child in my class, and let's work together. I think just that throwing that leaf over, throwing that baton over and say, hey, let's do this. I think that definitely make a difference in how things are done, and the communication between the parent and the teacher definitely when concerning the child. And like you said, talk about when the child is doing well too, not just waiting until something happens and it's like, oh, now I'm going to call the parent. And then you never know how many of those phone calls that parent get. So if they're only getting the bad, phone calls, then they're looking at their child some type of way, like you're a troubled child and you're doing this and whatever. When that child may be good, most of the time, 90% of the time, but that parent is not getting that positive feedback. They're only getting the negative feedback when it comes to direct communication. So yeah, I definitely think that will definitely make a difference between that with that communication.
Eventually, they're just not picking up the phone. It's just not picking up the phone. And the thing about it is, parents have sometimes tough times attending parent-teacher conferences.
Mm-hmm.
But I guarantee you, if you have a ceremony where that child is getting recognized, they'll be there. They'll be there. And there's the opportunity. You can recognize every student in the first grade. Their parents are 90% of parents are going to show up. And there's a chance where you can say, interact with them. There's a chance where you can say, hey, do you got 5 minutes to talk about this? You can get them there. But if the only thing you're doing is saying, hey, Johnny's in trouble, Susie's in trouble, eventually they're going to stop answering the phone. And then you lose that connection. And then all the child has is that parent saying, don't act up in school.
But I think even with that, if we go back to something you said earlier when you was talking about getting rid of the labels, even the parent-teacher conference never sounds like a good word. You know what I'm saying? So maybe change that language. The parent-teacher something. You know what I mean? Something different, but something more encouraging. Like you said, if it was from an aspect of promoting the child or celebrating the child, maybe more parents are come out for it. Because they know it's not just something bad again, but it's something good. You're coming to hear something good about your child and how your child is maintaining and accomplishing things. So just even that changing that language, would be a step in the right direction, as far as the school's concerned. But
it's
now,
getting them to that next level. And for example, Black and brown girls are more likely to be suspended, expelled, arrested than their white counterparts. But the ones that make it to college, and a lot of people don't know this, Black and brown girls, when they enter college, are more likely to graduate than any other group. So it's not
I've heard that
of ability. It's just getting them there. Because once you get those Black and brown girls there, they're excelling. They're excelling. They're the highest group of college graduates.
Yeah, and I've heard that statistic before. So now, unfortunately, I got to play devil's advocate, right? Because I was surprised, and not really surprised, but I was surprised at first to know that there are some people who don't even think that the prison school to prison pipeline exists. They think it's just some kind of excuse or whatever. So as I was looking into it, I was surprised to see that, like, that is actual people that just like, no, this is an excuse or whatever. So if you had a chance to speak to those people, what would you say to them to get them to understand the reality that there is behind this?
The first thing I would do is just look at the data. The data speaks for itself, in that the Black and brown students are getting suspended for discretionary offenses. Like I said, disrespect, disobeying an order, things like that. Their white counterparts are getting suspended for possession of drugs, possession of weapons, those more there's no discretion there. You got drugs on you, you got a gun on you. The statistics show that in every single state. There's very little disparity in that. Kids aren't getting, they like to think that kids are getting suspended because they're fighting and all that. And it's not that. The majority of kids are getting suspended. The majority of black and brown kids that are getting suspended for discretionary behaviors. The data is the most telling thing. And if you look at the data, and we want to ask why, there are only 2% of teachers across the country that are black males. Students that have at least one black male, all students, in their educational from K through 12 are 5 times more likely to graduate. Just one black male teacher makes that much difference. Think about that for a second. 76% of teachers are white females, but over 90% of administrators are white males. The data is what spoke to me, really. And not that I'm against any school push out. I want to keep all kids in the classroom because it affects all kids. But the data shows the disparity. The data shows how disproportionate things are happening in these schools. And the schools are consistent with the amount of funding they get and the percentage of black and brown students they have in there. The data tells the truth.
Okay. Well, I definitely want to thank you, Mr. Webb, for being on the podcast. Definitely thank you for the work that you are doing. I'm going to give you the last word and allow you to give your contact information for where we can, where the listeners can find you at. And so my last question is, if you could give advice to a student, what would you say?
Wow, that was a good one. I would say, let your gift make room for you. Whatever you're good at, focus on that, and everything else will fall into place. Your gift will make room for you. When I left the prison system, I didn't know what was going to be what had for me. I just did it, because I felt something. But my gift was speaking to students. My gift was working with young people. And it made room for me to go across the country. I live in Maryland. I'm in Atlanta today. And it just provided me a platform to do what I was born to do. So find your gift and allow it to make room for you.
All right. We can't say it no better than that. Mr. Webb, where can they find you at when they're trying to look you up?
On Instagram, I'm at Webolutionary. On Twitter, I'm at Webolutionary. Facebook, my page is Ending the School to Prison Pipeline, Webolutionary Motivation LLC. And my website, if you want to book me for professional development or academic success speaking to your students, is intheschooltoprisonpipeline.com. The 2 is the number 2. And I don't come there to impress you with my accomplishments. I come to impact you with my mistakes.
All right. Thank you again, Mr. Webb. Thank you for all of our listeners that have tuned in. I hope that you guys will continue to follow us on this journey, this podcast journey, as we help to heal, deal, and fulfill. Deal with your problems, heal from the pain, and fulfill your purpose. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you all later.